What's good, YouTube? It's been about a week since Mythic Plus actually launched, and I just wanted to make a video on what the meta is shaping up to look like, what specs have been performing the best, and also what's being played the most so far in Season 1 of Dragonflight. The meta is always shifting, obviously, so this is all subject to change, but we can definitely get a good sense of where it's heading, so let's take a look. 90% of you guys still aren't subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy this style of content and want to see more, then let me know by liking this video and dropping a sub to your boy. But let's get back on with the video. First, we'll start with the tanks then. Prot Warrior has been performing insanely well in this first week in Mythic Plus. Protection Warrior is taking up 29% of all tanks in all keys ran, and in keystones above 10 even more so, where they boast a 33.3% coverage for the tanks. They are clearly a meta spec if they stay in their current state, and will 100% continue to reign king in Mythic Plus for the rest of the season. Their main selling point is they take next to no damage as long as you spend your resources wisely on ignore pain when needed. They can out-heal their healers in large packs, and most importantly dish out some ridiculous overall damage as well over the course of the key, and with the domination of melee DPS specs in this expansion, their utility from Battle Shout will never go amiss. Even after the targeted nerfs to Prot Warriors, it hasn't seemed to really phase them, and they are still head and shoulders above the rest, even seeing them being double stacked for mythic progression in the raid as well. Like I said, if this spec stays how it is, there will be no questions asked on what the best tank is for Mythic Plus content. However, in saying that, Vengeance is the other tank spec that I'd like to shine a light on. Not only being one of the most fun tanks to play, it is also amazing performance-wise, especially in a Mythic Plus setting. Vengeance is currently taking up 19.3% of the tank player base in all keystone levels, and in 10s and higher, this only drops down to about 18.9%. This is nowhere near the coverage of the Protection Warrior across keys, but it is still a very respectable representation, and rightly so because of its performance so far. Unfortunately, it just doesn't supply the same tankiness that the Protection Warrior does, due to a lack of uptime on defensives. Although it has improved, you will still have moments in keys where you are much squishier and may have to kite, not only putting yourself at risk, but also decreasing your group's DPS massively. That being said though, for the most part, Vengeance is very tanky, especially when in meta, and with Demon Spikes rolling, you'll be able to face tank most packs with ease. Where the Vengeance Demon Hunter really excels though is with its amazing toolkit that really does feel like it was made around Mythic Plus content. Having access to different sigils for AoE interrupts through Sigil of Silence, Misery, and Chains if you talent into it, along with Chaos Nova now being accessible to the tank spec, you have some insane crowd control, as well as bringing the Chaos Brand debuff for any casters in your group. Moving on to the healers then, the first spec that I think is meta is the new Preservation Evoker. Although having a smaller representation across all mythic keystones in comparison to the Resto Druid, by around 5%, I do think it's a slightly better pick, especially with how the overall meta is shaping up at the moment. I think there's just a bigger player base for druids in general, which means they will be seen more across Mythic Plus. However, with around a 24% representation across all healers, the Preservation Evoker is clearly showing it's a great choice for Mythic Plus content, even while most people probably haven't figured out how to play this spec optimally just yet. It has some great throughput for healing as long as your group stays within 25 yards of you, due to the shortened range this healer suffers from. Though the probable main reason to bring this healer is for two massive reasons. The first one being Bloodlust. With how the DPS specs are performing, we seem to be lacking a source of bloodlust, so the Preservation Evoker fills this role really nicely, just making those bosses or massive pulls that much easier. But also, the Evoker has amazing damage throughput, arguably the best out of the healers, especially in an AoE situation, with abilities like Deep Breath and Fire Breath being able to do huge AoE bursts to help the group take down those big packs. One final advantage I want to mention for bringing the Evoker is the AoE Soothe, which has been immensely powerful, especially on this week with the Raging affix, being able to dispel multiple enrage effects with one button through a pressing roar, but also resetting the cooldown instantly if you hit enough mobs has been massively overlooked. So I just wanted to highlight how ridiculous this spell has been, especially for this first week of affixes. The Restoration Druids, on the other hand, boast around a 30% coverage for all healers in all keystones. Druids have always been a solid choice for a healer, and this has been solidified for the first season of Dragonflight. They have amazing throughput with their heals, which is about to receive another buff going into this second week of the season. With a lot of heavy movement fights, Resto Druids are excelling with their instant cast abilities and heal over time effects. They can also deal some very respectable damage over the course of a Mythic Plus run through Moonfire, Sunfire, Fire and the return of Nature's Vigil to get you through those harder bosses and also those packs. They are a very tanky spec too, with short cooldowns like Bark Skin and also Bear Form if they ever need it, and a huge reason to bring them to your run would be for their battle res. A massively undervalued part of their toolkit, which isn't seeming to be brought from many other specs that have landed in the meta, so this is a huge plus for the Druid. Additionally, they also bring their Mark of the Wild buff, increasing versatility by 3% for your whole party, which is going to be massive over the course of a key, just reducing that damage taken, but also buffing your party's damage by a little bit. Lastly, onto the most important part then, we have the DPS specs. For Keystones 10 and above, we are seeing a lot of representation from Outlaw Rogues. Rogue is always a safe bet for Mythic Plus content. They really are probably the best class overall for keys due to their insane utility, whether it's Shroud to skip through dangerous packs or their unlimited amount of stops to never let mobs finish their casts, through abilities like Kick, Cheap Shot, Kidney Shot, Blind, Gouge, the list really goes on for the Rogue in general, along with their new Atrophic Poison making mobs deal 3% less damage, which is going to be insanely valuable this expansion due to how much damage is actually going out. All this utility coupled with their insane overall damage, there really was no way the Outlaw Rogue in particular was not going to be part of the meta for the first season of this expansion. Being an Outlaw Rogue as well, for dungeons like Algathar's Academy where there's massive pulls every second, you could always swap out to the Sub Rogue as well to deal even more AoE damage, but also keep the insane utility and defensives that the Rogue also brings. Next we have Marksmanship Hunters, which were actually a massive surprise to everybody I think going into Dragonflight. Most people had MM Hunters in D tiers of their tier list, and after a series of buffs, this spec seemed to come out of nowhere and deal some truly insane damage. This is probably the biggest reason to bring the Hunter, as they are pumping out some ridiculous overalls. However, we all do know how squishy the Hunter class is in general. I have always thought of this take as a bit of a meme because people have always said it in previous expansions, but it feels like Hunter has always been meta for pretty much every season. But I really do think with the amount of unavoidable damage in Dragonflight, this could prove as a problem for this spec. Maining a Hunter myself, I am constantly out of defensives to use. They always seem to be on cooldown with the amount of insane damage that's coming out in these dungeons. However, they do bring some very unique and sought after utility through abilities like Binding Shot if you ever need to kite, traps to skip mobs as well, and also Wailing Arrow, which is actually a bonkers piece of utility, especially with how many casters there are, so this definitely helps them become more valuable to a Mythic Plus team. Windwalker Monks also see some high coverage in keys as well, which is actually a bit of a surprise to me because they're normally one of the least played specs. However, I'm sure this has changed because they are impossible to keep up with on damage. They do mental AoE burst, especially at the end of the pack with their Touch of Death. They are unkillable if played well due to so many different defensives that they have access to. I think they have around 4 massive defensives in total. They bring some amazing utility as well through a variety of party buffs, mainly in Mystic Touch for the rest of the melees that are also meta, and they also have very unique abilities like Ring of Peace for kiting, or it can also be used to skip mobs if you ever need to. Demo Locks are a great choice for ranged, as you won't want too much stacking in melee, especially with the seasonal affix, which is Thundering. They're also one of the few classes in the meta along with Resto Druids that are going to bring a battle res, which is actually pretty rare to come by, especially with this meta. They have some incredible stack cleave damage through their cool Dreadstalkers as well as their Fellstorm ability, and also a very good single target as well to get down those bosses. Warlocks in general are once again pretty much unkillable, especially with how their class talent tree buffs up their defensives, and also you can never say no to health stones for your party. Gateways are also very niche but can definitely come in very handy. They can be used for skips once we figure those gateway spots out, and also summoning stones can also be pretty undervalued for Mythic Plus as well. For instance, if you've skipped a pack of mobs and then one of your team dies and you need to summon them back, it works for that. But yeah, the Warlock is just very strong overall, and being one of the few ranged as well that can actually live, they are looking like a great choice for the first season of Dragonflight. Lastly, we obviously have the Havoc Demon Hunter. There's a massive representation of Havocs at the moment. I do think this could mainly be due to the hype they received before the expansion and season went live, where everybody was placing them in their own tier above the rest, which as a result got them nerfed a few times recently, though they are still a great choice for Mythic Plus, bringing some amazing cleave damage as well as single target damage damage too. They can definitely top the overalls, though they are not just a damage bot, don't get it twisted. They also bring AoE stops through Chaos Nova and Sigil of Misery, along with their Chaos Brand debuff for that extra piece of utility. And finally, they are just passively very tanky through the talents they take, which is going to be very helpful for how much damage we are taking in these keys in comparison to previous seasons. Overall, it seems like the top key runners have a bias towards taking more melee DPS than ranged, which was definitely expected due to how the melee specs were performing all through beta. We are also seeing a lot of rogues in specific, along with the Havocs I mentioned, and while the keys are still low enough, there's actually quite a few hunters mixed in there as well. But as for now, it's looking like a very melee dominant meta, aside from maybe your demo warlocks and MM hunters, and then you're going to be taking prop warrior as your chosen tank, and then purely because of how the meta has landed, you're probably going to be taking the evoker as your healer, even if it's only for the access to bloodlust. I would just like to highlight that all of these specs are viable and can complete most content in the game. This is just simply a list of the meta specs and also the most popular ones that people have been playing. Let me know down in the comments if you agree with the specs I've listed here, and perhaps what other specs you could see being slotted in along the way. Arcane Mages, I'm looking at you. And obviously this is all subject to change, as Blizzard did say they were going to do more frequent tuning this expansion, but as for now, this is pretty much where it stands. If you like this video and want to see more of this type of content, then please drop a like below and also subscribe to your boy, and until next time, I'll catch you guys later.